say that last night I was featured on Al Jazeera English, live on television. I was invited to take part in a panel discussion about why are African Americans moving to Africa, like what are the motivations behind it and reasons behind it. And I will link the video in this video's description box, or you can go to my website, AAinAfrica.com. You'll see it right at the top. I linked the video in there also. So I wanted to do a response, I guess. You know, it was live television. It was a 30-minute show, and the time really flew by, so you don't get to get in everything you want to say. Yeah, so I wanted to do a reflection, just add a little bit more, because, you know, it's live television, you're nervous, and there's a lot going on. So basically, this panel discussion was about tackling the reasons why some African Americans are moving to Africa. And I'll let you guys watch the video, but there were some, I would say, slight criticisms about African Americans, or maybe, you know, a politer way would be to say, like, some suggestions for those of us who visit the continent and those of us who are interested. And I felt like I had to kind of defend African Americans a bit, which, again, I didn't get all, like, my points across really in the best way that I wanted to, because of the time crunch and live television. First, I want to say there was one point that was made. I'm just looking at my notes. There was a criticism basically about us having African Americans too often having romanticized views of the motherland when we get here. And there was a point brought up by the South African panelist about how I guess some younger Black American students have romanticized views. And I guess my first, and they have romanticized views of, like, the motherland and of coming home, and not of the on-the-ground realities of what is really going on in South Africa. And because of their romanticized views, you know, because of having more of those views as opposed to really being deeper embedded and have a deeper understanding of what South African life is like, and South Africa is just one example. It prevents South Africans from being able to, I guess, receive these African American students better, or from being able to engage with them or maybe accept them better. So I guess my first thought was, it's okay to land in Africa having romanticized views, I think, because the only way to kind of unlearn that is by being on the continent of Africa, you know, like, you know, and that takes time. That's not something like unlearning and learning what life is really like in an African nation is not something that happens overnight. It doesn't even necessarily happen in a 6-month student abroad exchange program. Here I am, I've been in Namibia since 2010, and I'm still, you know, going through this like roller coaster ride of learning and unlearning and figuring out Namibia. And sometimes I say things and I put my foot in my mouth about Namibian culture. And then I'm like, you know, I reflect and I'm like, that wasn't, you know, I learn that, you know, my understanding of X, Y, or Z here wasn't necessarily like as clear as it was. And therefore I have to sort of like refigure out just basic everyday culture and life here, you know? So I guess what I'm saying is, I personally arrived here definitely with romanticized views of the motherland. And I don't quite think it's the worst thing in the world, just to say flat out, because number one, naturally, for many African Americans, for many African diasporans, not even just African Americans, a lot of us naturally have this interest and this wanting to come home, you know, and be welcomed back and things like that, because for some of us, Africa, the continent of Africa, and the slave trade are a big part of, you know, our lives and our histories, you know, and how we just feel about our lineage and our own culture, you know. So for me, like, I wouldn't criticize someone for having a romanticized view of coming home to Africa, just because I know what it's like, and I can understand where that emotion comes from as an African American whose ancestors were shipped to Barbados and shipped to North Carolina and the southern part of America, you know. I guess, I mean, for me, like, I'm more of a patient, like, type of person when it comes to things like that, just because I know how important it can feel, how important a trip to Africa, especially for the first time, just what it means deep down inside for someone that really wants to be reconnected with their African roots, you know? So I guess I wanted to say, if there are students or young people, especially young people, you know, you can't, like, I wouldn't expect them to come here having the continent all figured out and to knowing the different layers of South African society and things like that. And yeah, I mean, they're going to come here with romanticized views of the continent, most likely. And those things will take time to peel the layers from it. Like, for me, to be honest, like, it has taken me years to really get a handle on Namibian society, and I still am not there. You know, like, I could read the local newspapers a lot more. You know, I've joined some Namibian, like, political Facebook groups just to give myself, like, a deeper insight. You know, but what I'm saying is, I wouldn't expect African Americans to come here, you know, especially 400 years of slavery or whatever. We don't learn that much about Africa in school growing up in African nations. So you come here for the first time. And some people, yeah, may be like intellectual scholars and whatnot, and they follow the news from abroad. And some people may just be coming here to see, you know, I don't know, like that big statue in Senegal. So the same panelist also said that, you know, South Africans accept people who are willing to learn. Now, you know, number one, I'm not sure he speaks for like all South Africans, but I understood like what he was saying in terms of, you know, it makes sense. Like, you would want people that would come to the continent wanting to learn and things like that. And like, I feel like we have to be careful and cautious about who we say is not knowledgeable or good enough or qualified enough to experience visiting Africa. Why? Because, you know, I mean, I think about like my grandparents, like I spent many summers in Baltimore City. That's where my grandparents lived on my dad's side. And, you know, we all know Baltimore has some serious issues with the youth. One of the things that I think would be amazingly powerful would be to bring a lot of those kids on a trip to Africa. You know, now, are they going to arrive in Africa with all the perfect answers and the perfect interactions? Heck no, we know that they're not. But they have just as much of a right to experience the continent as any other African American does. You know, I really firmly believe that. And I think, again, there is power in experiencing the continent and just seeing, feeling and experiencing life in a Black country and being around Black leadership and Black business owners and things like that you don't even know the type of impact you could have, maybe on the type of impact a trip to Africa could have on one of those, you know, those Baltimore students. You know, there are going to be some African Americans that visit Africa, or African diasporans that visit Africa, that unintentionally make an offensive comment, that or that come here with a sour attitude or with stereotypes, and they unlearn them. That all happens through actual on the ground experiences and interaction, which is why it's such an important experience to have. I mean, what do you expect after people being, you know, 400 plus years removed from the continent of their ancestors? Like, how do you expect them to land in the new place, like, with this magically politically correct approach? It's not going to be that seamless, unfortunately. And so it doesn't necessarily even have to be volatile, but sometimes, you know, the approach may not always be in the best taste. Does that mean you throw those guys away? No, and only welcome the ones that seemingly already know everything? No. And I mean, I'm sure that there are many Africans, well, obvious, and I'm sure there are many Africans that have a lot of learning to do about diasporans, about African Americans, for example, because they just don't know. You know, I experienced this myself. People just don't know African Americans. You know, like, I've had Namibians say offensive things to me. I've had, many Namibians say, "Hey, what's up, my nigga?" They think that that's like a term of endearment to me, and it's not personally. I don't hold it against them. I recognize they just don't know, because they didn't necessarily maybe grow up learning about Jim Crow or the backgrounds of the N-word and things like that in school. And so I don't hold it against them. I'm just saying, like, you keep in context, like, what the baggage that we're all coming with when we meet each other for the first time. But also, don't underestimate African Americans, because many of us have and will continue to come here with a really healthy approach to getting to know and experience the local culture. So I'm just like, not every African diasporan or African American that visits the African continent is going to come with all the perfect answers and things like that. It's just that's not going to happen. But it's important for all of us to have that opportunity, and there are life-changing things that can happen from one visit to the continent. And we've seen that play out with many of the people that I've interviewed that now live in Africa. It was just that one visit and they were hooked, and they were, they had to get back, and their life was changed. So I think we need to, the welcoming, I don't care. I think everyone deserves a welcoming. I mean, except for like obvious, like mass murderers or rapists. Like, no, we don't want them coming to Africa. But like, but for the most part, like, I think we all deserve a chance, even those of us that are not going to come here with the perfect entrance and all the knowledge. And there are many different ways to experience this continent. That's the first thing. And some people that come here will be students that don't have, like this huge repertoire of like political and like, on the ground knowledge. And just coming here, like it's a big adjustment. You're inundated with a lot of culture and information and just a lot at one time. So it's going to take a while for those of you interested in visiting. It's going to take a while to get a feel for the country at a deeper level than just the tourist level. So what are some things that you can do if you're interested in coming here and having like a more nuanced understanding of what's going on? Read the local newspapers. If you're big on social media, check join some social media groups from the country that you're visiting and things like that. You'll get a deeper insight into what people in the country are actually talking about and things like that. But I guess like I've never really felt like I needed anyone's permission to come to an African country. Now maybe that's kind of like arrogant, but I never felt like that. Because I've always personally felt like I was owed this experience. Plain and simple. I've always felt like I was owed this experience. I never felt like I needed anyone's permission or I needed to come here the right way. I just wanted to come to Namibia and experience the continent of Africa. And I'm not in West Africa, obviously. I wanted to sort of just step foot on the soil of the continent where all of my, where my ancestors came from, basically. And so I felt that has, so much has been robbed from me that I don't feel like I need any Africans' approval, or I don't need to come here under their guidelines, I guess you could say. And I don't mean to say that like disrespectfully. I just really deeply feel that all African Americans, we should be getting sponsored tickets to the African continent, and not just African Americans, people in Brazil, people, all over, wherever, like we should be getting free ancestry DNA tests and things like that. Like we are owed a lot. Identity matters to many of us. It matters to me. So, again, I don't mean like that to be disrespectful. I just know that there are many of us out there that, we just have it. It's just a feeling in you that, you don't, need anybody's permission to come and experience the continent. Like you don't have to meet any guidelines, so to say. And the more you visit and the more you experience and the more open-minded you are when you get here, the more you will start to get a feel for what's going on in an African nation. But it's not something that can be learned overnight for sure, or in a 2-week trip. But I do think that there's a lot to be said just for a genuine interest and a genuine curiosity. And I think most African Americans, if they're coming to Africa to visit, the majority of them obviously are coming armed with a sort of a respect and a curiosity and some naiveness, definitely. I mean, I think that's to be expected because they just don't know the place. Peeling off those layers beyond just coming as a tourist and really learning a country, like it's not and adapting and immersing yourself and adjusting into the society. It's really not, it's not a perfect it's not a perfect like ladder to reaching that point of like understanding. Like that's if you ever get there, like to be honest, because there's just so much of a difference like when you've been raised in a country versus someone that has not been raised in a country, you know. So it's not always going to be pretty. You know, I'm not perfect. I have probably offended Namibians at some point in my life, unintentionally made comments, you know, or whatever. Sometimes, you know, I'm just having a difficult day and I'm short tempered with, you know, with someone I pass by on the street here. You know, it's not. And then in hindsight, I'm like, oh, okay, but that wasn't, you know, Kaylin, you should have. I think about where my feelings came from and I just like check myself. I'm like, you shouldn't have responded that way because in their culture, this is the way, you know, they interact. And American culture, maybe we're more direct or whatever. So there's a lot of like introspection and reflection that I go through all the time. And I just say that to say that immersing yourself into an African culture, getting a feel for an African culture, learning an African country's society and what is going on and getting to know the people is not always a pretty process. It can be extremely frustrating, actually. And just like one step forward, 2 steps backwards. That's the way it is, you know. So don't be too hard on yourself also. I'm going to be honest. I've been here in Namibia since 2010 and I don't have it all figured out. So there was another point made by this like amazing YouTuber. Like she inspires me in so many ways. And they played like a clip of her comment during the show, and she made a point, and I've heard other people say this as well. It's not really like just unique to her perspective, but she made a point basically saying that she didn't feel any desire to come to Africa to find her roots. Or to connect with her roots. You know, how many of us want to come here, and you know that's a big part of it, like finding our roots and connecting, you know, to our roots and our ancestry and things like that. And she was saying because she feels like her roots are right on American soil, and that her ancestors, you know, their blood, sweat, and tears is embedded in the DNA of America. You know, like for God's sakes, we built the White House. You know what I'm saying? Like, and we. Like economically, like slaves were the foundation of the America that we have today. And so I totally agree with that, you know, like I totally understand that. I guess for me, I do both. Like I've always felt both, like wanting to have a connection, wanting to find my roots in Africa, and wanting to come here to find those roots. It never made me feel like I was throwing away my African American roots or throwing away my African American like the power of my African American roots. I guess I've always kind of like it never felt like an either or for me. It was just always like this dual path of like really being kind of embracing this opportunity to just get a taste of maybe what my ancestors' lives were like and things like that in Africa, while at the same time holding on strong to my African American heritage, which I am like so proud of. To be honest, you know, there are a lot of people in the U.S. right now that are reaping the benefits of African Americans and of our ancestors. And we continue to do powerful things, you know, up until today. So for me, when people say that they don't feel a need to connect to their African roots because of their African American history, you know, like and for me, like I guess I do both at the same time. Like I stand hard for my African American ancestors. I really do. Like sometimes I just read stories about like African American slaves like back in the day, and I'm just like blown away, and I'm like, wow, like I'm so proud to have to be African American. You know, I mean, we are just bomb. Like, and then, you know, also being in Africa and reading stories about like, you know, West Africa and the slave trade, or reading stories about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution, or just reading, you know, I have not been to West Africa yet, except in the airport on the tarmac, but just the dungeons and the slave trade, or just learning about West African tribes today. You know, I'm just like blown away by like how rich my blood is, you know, to the combination of different tribes and different African nations that flows through my blood is so so powerful. And yes, that is something I want to reconnect with. I want to find out which specific tribes run through my blood, and I want to learn more about them. So for me, like, both are just equally powerful. Like, and someone's knocking at the door. Like, I can't. So I just wanted to reiterate, because sometimes, like, whether it's this whole conversation of cultural appropriation, whether it's like the diaspora wars, where people are online, like Africans are online trashing African Americans are online trashing Africans, like, or whether it's someone saying that they only welcome like these types of African Americans to Africa. Like, I just wanted to reiterate why you really, just don't be deterred from individual comments, and don't let them prevent you or keep you from having a meaningful interaction with an African, or don't let them keep you from visiting an African nation, because let me tell you the on the ground reality. This, like, forget the internet and like all the crazy comments, because we know the internet is crazy, and there's a lot, people say a lot of stuff on the internet that they don't even say, that they would never say in person. Aside from the internet, the on the ground reality for me, and for many of the African Americans that I have interviewed on my website that are living all around Africa, west, northeast, south, central, the on the ground reality is like, you are going to have great situations and you're going to have not so great situations. You're going to interact with people. You're going to meet people. You're going to have a wide variety of experiences, and many people will welcome you. Some people won't know what to do with you. You won't know how to fit in necessarily, but you kind of go with the flow. You take away from experiences, you take away what you can from experiences. People are here living their lives, not really worried, too concerned about policing an African American's immersion into their culture. Many of the African Americans that I've interviewed always like say that they've been warmly welcomed, now again, it's not perfect. I wrote an article about why living in I've written articles, just talking about why it is not a utopia. It is not perfect. I've met people here that have not been friendly. Definitely, that happens. For me, I try not to chalk it up to, like, if I come across, a Namibian who is unfriendly to me, and I know that I really haven't done anything wrong to them or given them any reason to be, I have learned not to generalize all Namibians. I've learned not to look at, just start having this bad taste in my mouth for all Namibians. Even I get street harassed all the time in my town by men. I have learned not to throw all Namibian men away because of, some bad apple. I look at things on an individual basis. This one person was mean to me. That doesn't mean all Namibians are assholes, like, and so, but anyway, the reality on the ground is it will not always be perfect. But the reality for me is that I have some amazing experiences. I have some not so amazing experiences. I have some days where the lessons and experiences that I have can't even be put into words. It's just something inside of me, that self-reflection that only Kaylin can understand the magnitude of that experience. You know what I mean? And I think, aside from what's going on the internet and people's comments and stuff like that, there's a lot of power to be said for just on the ground interaction with other Africans, as an African American or other African diaspora. And a lot of that really cannot be put into words. It will not always be rosy and fantastic. Sometimes it'll be uncomfortable on both ends, for the African and for the African, whatever. I'm just saying that give yourself the opportunity to experience the continent at a deeper level than just some negative comments on the internet, and don't let them deter you from the experience that, in my opinion, you are owed. And it doesn't mean that you're throwing away anything back home or anything like that. And in the comments section of this of the Al Jazeera panel discussion on YouTube, I saw someone commented. I didn't write the comment down, like copy and paste it, so I'm like paraphrasing it. But I saw someone mention that they were like disillusioned by like the entire panel because we were all speaking like about our own, I guess, like selfish interests and reasonings behind either moving to Africa or just our general opinions about African Americans in Africa, and we weren't talking about like the collective importance and value of the diaspora, you know, and the interactions and you know, maybe moving abroad and to an African country, and the economic power and the things that we can do if we join forces. And I hear what that person is saying. Like, it was a 30-minute interview, and you know, it really flew by. Like, that was the quickest 30 minutes of my life. Like, and when there's like 4 to 5 people on the panel, everybody, you know, you just can't get in everything you want to say. But like, that is also why I created my YouTube channel, why I created my website, African American in Africa, basically just because I personally feel like there is a power in us uniting, in us getting to know each other, in us interacting. You know, when you see Chinese people in Namibia, for example, with their China shops, which are like dollar stores, when you see European investors in Africa, you know, versus an African diaspora, a black investor from a country outside of the African continent, you know, there's just a higher chance of social responsibility to me, what I think of a black person coming to Africa to open a business or to invest, then, you know, probably, and just like a personal connection and responsibility, a feeling of responsibility, then probably like a Chinese entrepreneur or a European entrepreneur is coming to Africa with, you know, like there is so much power in us, yes, coming together and working together. I totally agreed with that comment. And I you know, was sorry that that point wasn't brought up, because it's 2018. We are all seeing what is going on globally, whether it's Brexit, whether it's the president of the United States and the racism that's coming out of the White House every day, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's inequality in Namibia, issues of land rights in Namibia, inequality in South Africa, issues of land rights in South Africa, and whatever else is going on around the continent. I'm sure there are racial and issues of inequality and social injustice in the Black in South America and with the diaspora there, as well as with the diaspora people that are living in European countries, in the Middle East. You know, collectively, like Black people, it's like we're almost on attack right now, like under attack. Like, I guess it's been that way, but it's sort of like coming more to the surface for a lot of people to like really get slapped in the face with. So we do, you know, like there is power in just the reconnection of the African diaspora, whether it's economically for building up African nations, whether it's just the healing or that comes from us having conversations and things like that. Like, there really is a lot of collective power that we hold, and it's a shame that we don't. It's a shame that kind of gets lost in translation. It's a shame that gets lost, but that is also why I created my website. I don't talk about it much, but that's why I've been interviewing African Americans living across Africa and just sharing their experiences, because, you know, it's like I'm just trying to do my part in the reconnection, because I really feel that there is a lot of power in the reconnection that will benefit Black people collectively on a whole. So anyway, those are my just quick thoughts on the Al Jazeera interview that I did. You can check out that panel discussion. I'll put the link in my description box. If you are looking to find more experiences from other African Americans living around the African continent, don't forget to check out my website, African American in Africa. The website's the website address is www.aainafrica.com. Okay, guys, thank you so much for all of your continued support, because honestly, without you guys, I would never have been invited to do a panel, like to take part in a panel on Al Jazeera. So it was you guys are amazing and just have been amazing over the years, whether it's here on Facebook, my website. I just have like a fantastic supporters. So thank you guys so much. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.